Gothic by Jonathan Macho. I should have known it was too good to be true. How I, a humble, hard-working plumber from the Bronx, thought I could marry a princess, God only knows. From the moment I got down on one knee on the stoop outside our building, my denim dungarees spattered with runoff, her pink silk dress ballooning off her waist, keeping me so far away she couldn't reach to take the ring from my hand, well, I knew there would be obstacles to our union, but I also knew she was worth it. The way she blushed and giggled, twirling her little parasol, kissing me on the nose. Not to get too corny here, but I loved her, and I was sure she loved me too. She insisted we travel to our ancestral home for the ceremony, some kind of wedding tradition that went back generations. I was more than happy to, although my brother was skeptical. He told me straight, which I was impressed by in a way. The man was not known for his bravery, but then I always found it hard to take that nasal whine of his seriously. He said I hadn't known her all that long, that I was always running after her from one place to the next and she never did anything for me, that he never even heard of whatever the hell country she was supposed to be in charge of. Looking back now, these were all sound points, granted, but at the time I was sure I knew how it was. He just didn't want to keep the business afloat while I was away. I tried to tell him, I said, "Come on, Lou, we won't need a business when I'm a friggin' prince." I honestly thought he'd take my lead. It was my name above the door, after all. We were bros, sure, but what bros, you know what I mean? He was always overcautious, jumping at shadows. The man brought extra toilet paper with him to plumbing jobs, for Christ's sake. Crammed the van full of the stuff, like people never needed a wipe. That's what I was there for. Not the wiping, to give him a push. To take the leap so he could follow on. We pretty much did everything together. To be honest, I couldn't picture getting married without the big lug there. But after we argued that night, he was day room. Wouldn't even pick up the phone. So I set off for the old country alone. Well, not alone. My lady was with me, of course, and her entourage. An entourage, imagine that. Funny little guys they were, always wearing these big hats like beanbags on their heads and talking in these harsh, squeaky voices. They kept going out of their way to explain everything to me, too. Like just because I didn't go to no fancy school, I didn't know how to work a door or something. Still, I could overlook it just to hear some of the stuff they said. I remember once my fiancé asked them for this brooch for the big day. A lovely gold one with a blue stone that was a big part of the wedding tradition. And the guy said, "I'm sorry, princess, we left that in your other castle." I mean, other castle? As far as I could tell, her family had places from here to Isle Delfino. Looking back, I just wish she had brought me to any of those. Anywhere but where we ended up. Don't get me wrong, the place looked gorgeous from the outside. It was white and red and all pointed at the tips, not to mention huge, and I'm from New York, so when I say that you know it means something. I was straight out of a fairy tale. On the way there, as we hit maybe the fourth dirt road between the airport and our destination, I started to worry it would all be a bit Gothic, if you know what I mean. Ma used to be really into these romances, proper bodice rippers, and I used to read a couple chapters when there was nothing else to do, in between jobs, on breaks, whenever. Here's a tip. Old-fashioned paperbacks stand up to splashing toilet water surprisingly well. Anyway, in those stories, no matter how much the lovers felt for each other, no matter how hard they tried, things never ended well. But then those castles were always crumbling and all worn away. This place shone. There was a stained glass window right over the door as you came in, and when it caught the light around midday, word to my mother, you could hear angels singing. It was beautiful. Sometimes I would just take my cap off, hold it to my chest, and soak it all in. Felt like I was flying. Other stuff was a little weird. Princess was busy with important official things and getting the ceremony sorted, and that left me with a lot of time to explore, really scope out the joint. It could get a little lonely, sure, but there wasn't much I could do about that. After a while, I thought I'd come to lose sometimes, peeking out from the greenery just out of sight. The mind does funny things when you're so far from home, and this was about as far from the city as I'd ever been. That might have explained some of the edginess I was feeling. Some. Not all. First, there was a moat. So far, so castle, but as a plumber I appreciate the importance of good water management, and this thing just seemed to stagnate. I'd been down a good few pipes in my time. I volunteered to take a look at how everything was joined up in there once, just to make sure the lovely red and white bricks weren't under the threat of any splashback. And the princess, she just giggled, kissed me on the nose, and got back to whatever she was doing before I entered the room. Come to think of it, a lot of our conversations went like that. I decided not to push the matter further. There were all these paintings, too. At least one in each room, sometimes more. Loads more. Even in the basement I found paintings all hung up and framed, and who's admiring art down there? Some of them were pretty pictures, landscapes mostly, all kinds of horizons, snowy tundras, sandy seascapes, and even the pyramids for some reason. I liked those best. I knew where I stood with those. As for the others, some were just weird. Mountains made of mushrooms, weird. They were landscapes still, but nowhere I'd recognize, nowhere in this world. Strangely abstract art to find in a place so old and traditional. And then the rest were hellish, and I mean that in a very literal biblical sense. I haven't gone to church since Ma's funeral, but still, they did not sit right with me. And then there were the really weird rooms. They played tricks on you. There was this one, even more of an art gallery than the rest, where the far wall was a mirror. You didn't even look at any of the art in there, you just ended up looking at yourself the whole time. Sometimes the reflections didn't even match the room around you. Paintings you were just admiring would be missing from the walls in the mirror, or a sculpture that had smashed the week before would be sitting on a table just behind you, and you'd turn again and you'd look again, but it'd all change each time you weren't paying enough attention. That wasn't the only room that messed with me. This other one had 3 paintings, and when you walked in, they looked about the same, but it was an optical illusion. They all had these animals on them, one big, one little, although what kind of animal they were I couldn't tell you. One was mad close and small, one about regular size and regular distance, and one massive and a mile away. And that got me thinking, what kind of architect designed this place? How much floor space are you going to waste to yank a man's change? And then there were the stairs. Those goddamn stairs to the attic. They were at the top of the castle. I mean, of course, where else are you going to put your attic stairs? But that meant I was always already pretty puffed whenever I reached them. Still, they had this draw. The steps were inlaid with gorgeous red carpet, so rich and fine I couldn't make the texture out without getting in close. Red's always been my color. The wall either side were the same ruddy brown bricks as most of the castles, but here they seemed redder somehow too, like they were lit up in red, like the carpet was burning to light the way up to the top. I tried climbing them once, when the rest of the place had just about finished screwing with me, and they just kept going, and going, and going. There were more paintings too running alongside, all the same paintings this time, again and again. I had no idea what they were paintings of. They were too murky to make out more than impressions of what might have been eyes and teeth. Something smiling at me, I thought. Something mocking me. After a while I broke into a run. I'm not exactly a fit man, but I used to be long jump and high jump champion in the old track and field, me and my brother both. We trained together, push each other on, some things you can never unlearn. I leapt up those stairs. I jumped so hard it hurt, everything hurt, and I yelled like Lou would yell and pushed on. But it was never high enough. I went so far that I knew I couldn't go back. Couldn't face the long climb down. But that was the worst part. When I finally gave in, when I slumped my way back, I hit the bottom in no time at all. I hurried to the princess, asked her what the hell was going on, and she looked at me in a way I'd never seen before. No giggles this time. No kiss. Those beautiful blue eyes of hers just turned cold. The softness of her face went taut and flat, and she made me promise to never climb those stairs again. I promised her. I lied. I watched the stairs like a hawk until I saw one of her little guys head up there with a key. That was my way in. I got up in the middle of the night, pulled my dungarees on over my pajamas, and crept through the hallways. I wish my bro was there with me. He always thought so much of me. Really gave me a boost. His super brother, he'd call me. I meant to be the brave one, but suddenly every painting was a nightmare, every turning was my last, and I'd give anything to have him there, so I could pat him on the back and tell him it was all right. I just had to know what she was hiding, had to know what madness I was marrying into. I was running my way through paperback after paperback in my head, working my way through every unhappy ending I could think of. Nothing could have prepared me. Nothing. Finally, I reached the Serpent's quarters and snuck the key from its hook on the wall. I practically flew to the stairway, and this time through some dark juju I don't care to think about. That's all they were. Stairs, with a bottom and a top. I followed the red light up into the pitch dark. The paintings either side of me were definitely smiling now. I wondered what they were so happy about this time. Faces to my left, what they were, I didn't want to know. God help me, I'd find out. But I thought I could recognize the princess and the ones to my right, grinning wider and wider. The attic was dark and musty and cobwebbed, but I wasn't looking at any of that. In the deep shadows, at the far end of the room, a figure was running backwards and forwards. What it was, monster or man, I could not tell at first sight. It snatched and growled like some strange wild animal, but it was bigger than any eye had ever seen, and its eyes seemed to burn through the dark at me. I drew closer, lost in the nightmarish wonder of the thing, and its shape became clearer and clearer. It had an enormous shell covered in sharp, protruding bone, flanked by squat, scaly limbs and topped with a snarling, lumpen head. I'd seen this face before, I realized with horror, masked by a similar familiar murk. I'd seen those eyes. I'd seen those teeth. In the paintings. In the monstrous paintings on the stairway that would never end. And on top of that awfully familiar head, there sat a crown. And now you know. It was my princess. She stood framed in the doorway, all the light of her lost in that room's implacable darkness. Her voice was cold and cruel. The marriage cannot go on, not now that you have discovered my impediment. Impediment? I didn't know where to look. A clanky told me the monster was in chains, but showing it my back still seemed like a bad idea. You're telling me you married that thing? One must do what one has to for the safety of her kingdom, she said. It sounded like a threat. Tradition is everything here. His Majesty was a marriage of political convenience only. You know I only have eyes for you. You're mad, I cried. And you promised, she replied simply. At some point at least a dozen of her squat servants had filled the space behind her, all smiling little smiles and cooing in those sickly sweet voices of theirs. They started to advance, and I stepped back. The chains clattered and went taut, and I jumped forward again. I was at the very top of the castle with nowhere to go, trapped between a monster and a madwoman. Then I heard it. I thought that the king creature was roaring, but the noise was coming from the wrong direction. There was a crack of splintering wood, a rush of air, and a blur of fists. Little henchmen were flying everywhere. The princess was staggering back. My brother was standing in the doorway. He hurried over to me, had to shout to be heard over the princess's shrieking and the monster's snarls. Jump! He pointed to a dusty window that I hadn't spotted in the gloom. I wanted to ask if he was crazy, but the snarling and the shrieking were blurring into one unending scream, so with a bellow of our own, we crossed the distance and leapt, arms in front of our faces, glass bursting all around us as we fell through the cool night air. We landed hard on something soft. Lou had brought the van all this way, God only knows how, and had cushioned our fall with enough toilet paper that I could have passed out right there and woken up comfy the next morning. Instead, I sat up and gazed in amazement as the castle was engulfed in flames. The topmost tower was first to go, smoking like a chimney stack, then bursting out, spreading the embers until the whole beautiful, terrible place was up. I thought of all those paintings in all those rooms, all those weird worlds just burning away. I tried not to think of the princess. At the time, I guess my brother must have done it, but he still swears otherwise. Says he saw a gout of fire billowing from that attic right after us, chasing us out of there like we didn't belong. All I know is the stained glass window looked a different kind of beautiful that night as it swelled and burst and scattered in the winds. I turned and looked at my brother, my super brother, the coward, my hero. I didn't know what to say, but he did. Come on, let's go home.